Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience as we had a few technical difficulties there. And those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, I'm Heather Farrell. I'm the curator and director of exhibitions here at Burlington City Arts. And I am thrilled to have you here for our artist talk with Mariam Ghani. And this is part of the programming for our current exhibition, Do We Say Goodbye, which is now on view at the BCA Center. Well, I'm very pleased to welcome Mariam tonight here to Burlington. As an artist, writer, and filmmaker, Mariam's work examines places, spaces, and moments where social, political, and cultural structures take on physical forms. Her creative practice spans video, sound, installation, photography, performance, text, and data. Tonight, she will discuss some of her recent projects and ideas, as well as her 2024 film, which is on view right across here. There's a hole in the world that we used to. As part of our exhibition. A brief bio. Currently, Mariam Ghani is a faculty member of Bennington College, Vermont, where she's taught film video since 2018. She received her BA from New York University and her MFA from the School of Visual Arts, New York. Mariam has been a recipient of numerous fellowships and residencies recognizing her work, and just to give a brief excerpt here, but this also includes the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship from the John and Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and she has received support from the Creative Capital Arts Matters Foundation, as well as the BCA Center for International Human Rights at Yale Law in New Haven. Her work has been exhibited widely, nationally, as well as internationally, including the Stadtwerk Kunsthalle, Baden-Baden in Germany, the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., and the Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York. A more extended bio is available in our gallery guide. So before I turn the time over to Mariam, I'd like to make a few comments on the format of the program because we have our wonderful in-person audience as well as our virtual audience here as a hybrid event. For those of you joining via Zoom, please use the Zoom Q&A feature to pose your question for Mariam at the end of her presentation. Jackie, our wonderful curatorial assistant, will share the question with our on-site audience. A reminder that tonight's talk is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. For those attending in person, like to put some questions at the end of the talk, just raise your hand and I will bring the microphone around for you so that everyone can hear. Thank you again for your patience as we resolve the technical glitches, and I'd love to turn the time over to Mariam Ghani. Welcome.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, so I think it's going to be a little so excuse me for doing to all of you. Okay, so it is recognized a lot of this presentation, very similar to one I gave in April while she was there. All the day for that. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing my practice generally. Then go start by saying I have a very wide-ranging practice to provide project. It's to say that I work with the section of war, migration, memory, evaluation, you know, very light, fluffy topic. As a child of Lebanese and Afghan exiles, I essentially grew up in these intersections. Still been there. Why? I now my own exile from homelands that I came to know and love as an adult, which have once more been overtaken by violence. Although I did get to go back to Lebanon this summer, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. Okay. All right,
So I often work with archives as collaborators, sites of inquiry, and sources of material. And I do this because I'm concerned with the question of what is and will become or remain available to history. Okay. Yeah, Jackie's also got multiple jobs tonight. For the same reasons, I also work with databases and archives as forums, and this is probably most notable in my long-term collaboration with Chitra Ganesh, ongoing since 2004 as the Experimental Archive Index of the Disappeared. And the index documents the human costs of post 9/11 US policies at home and abroad. I like how archives can hold space for nonlinear, marginal, and contested histories, and even store suppressed histories until they can be accessed again. So archives are a great space for the reserved. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is from our series in the index that was investigating former Black site prisons in Afghanistan. And so what you see here is a telephoto photograph of the Hotel Ariana, which was the unofficially acknowledged CIA base station in Kabul. And it was likely used as a temporary detention site for prisoners that were later dispersed to the Black Site Prison Network between 2002 and 2005. The redaction patterns that are superimposed on the image are taken from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Torture Report as released in 2014, specifically from page 169 and surrounding pages, which allude to the quote unquote boxes of money, which were presented to local government officials and considered as quote unquote subsidy payments, intended in part as compensation for support of the CIA detention program. Which is a more official variant of something we described in this project as the contract to look away from the things that we do not want to see, which is what enabled the Black sites to exist. Next slide, please. These are also index projects. This is a text that we produced for the Radical History Reviews issue on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And it was essentially annotating and layering documents from our archives. We've just sort of revived it as a print series for an upcoming exhibition. And this speaks to kind of one of my longstanding interests, which is essentially pulling on loose threads in history and looking for what is scribbled in the margins or lost in the redactions or readable between the lines of official accounts. Next slide, please. Yes.
Everyone,
This is better for Zoom, yes? Okay. All right. More separation between foreground and background. Okay, so sometimes I work with repertoires in the sense of like the archive and the repertoire, that book, rather than or in addition to archives. So that's embodied knowledge, which is passed from body to body or gleaned through presence in specific sites and times. And next slide, please. That's the principle that animates much of my long-term collaborative work with the choreographer Erin Ellen Kelly, including the 2018 project When the Spirits Moved Them, They Moved, which experiments with the space and form of shaker meetings as a possible form of being in common in very fractured times. And ecstatic sound and movement were very much included in that experiment. This is the one that's now in the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Next slide, please. Okay, there should be sound on this. Yeah, there we go. Okay. No? 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 There you go. So this video is derived from a 12-hour durational performance. And this clip is from quite early in that arc of the day. Okay, next slide, please. And then this is from much later. Getting towards the end of these 12 hours, when you can see the dancers are really getting exhausted, they're starting to like lose their training, and just like be. That was kind of the point of doing it for 12 hours, was to get to that place where the body gets that tired and the control is lost. It's like an ayahuasca ceremony, basically. Like, same principle without the ayahuasca. Also like whirling dervishes. Yeah. So each of these movement phrases was repeated for 10 minutes. So they were jumping for 10 minutes straight. There's another bit where they were rolling on the floor for 10 minutes. And the dancers contributed a lot of the movement phrases. The dancers are all from Louisville and Lexington. This was shot in a Shaker village in Pleasant Hills, Kentucky. So this is it right towards the end when we're into improvisation. So couldn't do that till everyone was very tired. Okay, so the mirrored arrangement of channels is meant to kind of reference the Shaker gift drawings, if any of you are familiar with those. These are the drawings that were made after participants in Shaker meetings during the period known as Mother Anne's Revival had ecstatic visions and then made drawings based on their visions. And a lot of those drawings are extremely symmetrical. And I was really struck by the prevalence of symmetry in those drawings. And I wanted to make something that was also extremely symmetrical. But also I wanted to think about how in Shaker villages, there's a distinction between the world, which is everything outside the village, and the community, which is the village. But the meeting halls were open to the world. And they're also open to chaos in the sense of like they're open to whatever happens in a meeting. And the meeting hall where we shot this film actually once had a 19-hour long meeting. It's pretty famous for that. Which is why they were like, yeah, you can have a 12-hour durational performance in our meeting house. That sounds totally appropriate. So it's all about this idea of the chaos of the performance being enclosed in the order of the village, of the nature of the way that the village is built into its landscape, which that one is particularly beautiful because it not only has, you know, the color coded buildings and the paths that run between them, but also like these Kentucky like white horse fences, right? And bluegrass. So it's a pretty special Shaker village. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so let's see if we can get this twist around. No, maybe. Yeah. All right. Okay. So one of the ways that I have thought about this kind of approach to making is as speculative history. So in the same way that speculative fiction starts in the present with an observable phenomenon and extrapolates forward, speculative history starts in the present with an observable phenomenon and extrapolates backwards. The idea of doing that is, you know, to try to recover some histories that are not written. This resonates with like Saidiya Hartman's critical fabulation, if any of you are familiar with that, as a method for recovering unwritten histories. I'm referring to her essay Venus in Two Acts, and her assertion there that in speculating about the inaccessible silenced voices of the past, one might be also able to tell an impossible story while simultaneously amplifying the impossibility of the telling, right? Which is a really beautiful way that she phrases that. The implications of this aren't merely confined to counter histories, but also a history of the present and the incomplete project of freedom, which is something we should, I think, always keep in mind, that the project of freedom is still incomplete. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I like to work with formal constraints in my work that produce rigorous structures. And this might have something to do with my early training in structuralist literary theory. I don't know. Or with my later interactive work and its reliance on coding and databases. These are just theories. But in constructing my films, I'm looking to make visible the patterns and systems and structures that shape our lives and stories. So colonial legacies, structural racism, physical infrastructure, cultural histories, the limits and possibilities of language. So even when the content of the work operates at a more intimate and familiar scale, the form of the work always pulls back to a more systemic level in order to push viewers to make more high level connections. Next slide, please. So how this actually operates in practice. For example, in the 2-channel work, What We Left Unfinished from 2012, every shot is a tracking shot. And their speed and direction are matched across these 2 channels, which were shot in, one is shot in the Museum Friedrichshainum in Kassel, and the other is shot in the Darlaman Palace in Kabul. This was done for the Documenta 13, which was exhibited in both Kassel and Kabul. So the effect of, these constant tracking shots is of like a restless, weightless camera that's haunting the halls of the museum that was at one point a ruin. Like when Documenta first started, the Museum Friedrichshainum was still a ruin. It was a ruin until Documenta 7. That's the first Documenta where the building was actually renovated. And then Darlaman Palace is a ruin that was once a palace, and then actually about 10 years after I filmed this became a museum. Yeah, it was renovated later and was intended to be a museum. It never, I think, actually opened, but it was renovated into a kind of white cube museum space. So each building is like the past or future of the other. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. And this is an excerpt from that film, which also has sound.
Both stories about without knowing the great problems. Only after he followed close the sun does he recognize his child. Literally the breath of the sea he is doing then. The sun that further down is the old woman in his face, the legendary alone. His father was raised by King, and like Phoenix was done all his rivalries, and he actually would compete. The Shaman depending on the perspective of it's close. The note the heroes of the Shaman name and testament. The tempest is stolen the lone Jola, valuing the warriors there the first time. The walls of the palace itself record more later dialogue in the lofty ideals and pregnant realities of the Civil War. Elaborate modern memorials left by the first group of occupiers are overwritten with thicker clusters of names left by the next group to take their place. In the following layer, sardonic commentary appears, perhaps reflecting the gradual degradation of group morale as the war dragged on with little prospect for resolution in sight. Up the hill from Darlaman, in the Tajbek Palace built by the same king for his queen,
The Soviet servicemen who occupied the palace in the 1980s covered the walls with Cyrillic scrawls about mothers and girlfriends and how much they wanted to go home. In the 21st century, the International Security Assistance Forces, having in turn appropriated the Tajbek Palace and its strategic hill, would add their own legend to the walls. Only the dead will see the end of the war. Graffiti has a strangely bloody history in Afghanistan, dating back to the story of Rabia Balkhi, who was punished for an illicit love affair by being thrown into the Balkh Palace hammam with her wrist slit. Before she died, she wrote a poem on the wall in her own blood, which finishes with these lines: "My eyes can see horror and call it beauty. My tongue can touch poison, but taste sugar sweet." While in another country this might be considered a cautionary tale, in Afghanistan, Rabia Balkhi is a beloved heroine, after whom many girls' schools are named. Indeed, we would do well to remember that the outward signs of victory, defeat, love, and grief are different in different places. The mourning dress may be white here, but black there. A veil assumed here would be thrown off there. A white bird may signify peace or an unquiet spirit. Either way, it would be unlucky to kill it. Rosewater, which is used to make the wedding sweets, also serves to wash the body before enveloping it tenderly in its final shroud. A building, like the Friedrichshainum or Darlaman, that is set on fire, not once but twice, not twice but 3 times, should be examined closely. In the tales of Afghan fabulous, jinn are created from smokeless fires and return to fire as man does to dust. The jinn are everywhere and nowhere, impersonal and indefinable. Some jinn are evil, while others are more like imps of the perverse. All jinn are drawn to the heat of human anger, and the paler flames that flicker in unwary hearts.
Okay. I have joked about this film that it was like trying to make Russian art with a rubber garden hose, some chewing gum, and 2 paper clips, because we had a very, very small budget and only 10 feet of track. Yeah. So it was a very complicated and difficult project, but I'm fairly proud of what we managed to do in the end. And the thing that kind of solved it for me was rewatching Last Year at Marienbad and realizing, oh, none of the shots in Last Year at Marienbad are actually that long. They're all actually pretty short. The thing that makes you think there are long, endless tracking shots down the corridors of the building in Last Year at Marienbad is the voiceover and the way that the voiceover loops back on itself constantly. I was like, oh, okay, that'll work. That'll work. That'll work. Okay, next slide, please. So in the city choreography film, Smile, You're in Sharjah, which I made with Aaron in 2009, it follows a day-night day structure, and almost every shot has a match cut on action, whether obviously in the foreground or hidden deep in the background. And this kind of signals the way the film is interested in the city, suburbs, and exurbs of Sharjah as a constant cycle of construction, consumption, demolition, and reconstruction, all of which is powered by migrant labor. So we'll watch a short excerpt from that. That's the next slide. Yeah, water bottles are a theme in this film. You kind of follow them from the desalination plant, like all the way through their life cycle. So the wooden boats you see on the docks there are actually built in India, and then they mostly travel between Africa and the Gulf, trading consumer goods to Africa and then bringing coal back. So that's the kind of two kinds of goods that you saw on those boats there. Camp made a whole project about it called From Gulf to Gulf to Gulf, which is really, really good if you're interested. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So I've made work obviously in and about a number of different places and address different historical moments, but what I'm looking for as an artist is, as Heather said earlier, moments and places where social, political, and cultural structures become visible in some way. And what that looks like is something like this children's playground, which is made from parts discarded by North Sea oil rigs in Norway. So, this is in Stavanger, which is basically where people rotate off the oil rigs in the North Sea for their 1 week off out of their time on the oil rigs. So it's also where the Museum of Petroleum is located, which is one of those guilt museums, like the Opium Museum and the Golden Triangle. And it's a fascinating place. And this is across from the Museum of Petroleum. So yeah, these are very interesting kind of surfacings of what is going on under the surface in a country's imaginary. Okay, next slide. Another thing that this can look like is this. A migrant labor camp for rent. And I'm interested in border zones, labor camps, and cities in the grip of rapid economic shifts. Next slide. Architectures of democracy, green zones, surveillance infrastructures, and other security cultures. And places where nature and artifice imitate and influence each other. So, for example, this was filmed at a site where Viking rock graves were excavated and then reassembled and replaced. So this is right in front of where the Viking rock graves were reassembled and replaced. But that's one of the reasons we were interested in filming at that site, because you can't actually tell. They were reconstructed in such a way that you can't tell that they were ever taken away, which I find really fascinating. Okay, next slide, please. So my most recent collaboration with Erin Ellen Kelly was a January 2024 performance commissioned for the Smithsonian American Art Museum. It's called Like a Phantom, Near or Far, An Occasional Figure Moving, which is taken from a Walt Whitman poem. And it moved dancers and audiences throughout the museum in a series of scenes that evoke the building's history and materiality. It's a Walt Whitman poem because Walt Whitman actually was a nurse in the building when the building was used for housing wounded Union soldiers during the Civil War, and wrote poems about it, about that time. We shot the final rehearsal and some of the 2-hour-long live performances, and we're wrapping up the multi-channel edit now. It's actually in color and sound. And yeah, that's that. Okay, next slide, please. In 2019, I completed my first feature film, which is the documentary What We Left Unfinished. And I came to feature films really late in my career, and mostly because this particular project, which started out as an exhibition and a series of live cinema events, it just really wanted to be a feature film. It just kept saying, I want to be a feature. What it is the mostly true story of 5 unfinished feature films from the communist era in Afghanistan, which is 1978 to 1991. And it brings together newly rediscovered and restored footage from those lost films, with the stories around the films as told by the directors, actors, and crew who made them. So we can watch the trailer. It's the next slide.
خودتان در زمان کودتا چی احساس میکنید؟
شاید ترس.
برداشت شخصی من همی است که وقتی که حادثه 7 سال بشه یک بر رشد فرهنگ و هنر افغانستان یگانه دریچه ارتباطی در طول تاریخ افغانستان.
و سینمای افغانستان یک گلدن تایم بود. و طور مثال میتونم بگویم که مثلا قوای مسلح افغانستان کاملا در اختیار ما بود. از طیاره گرفته تا توپ تا چیزی که ما کار داشتیم برای ما مهیا بود.
این فیلم ها در باره یک منبع تبلیغاتی برای خود دولت هست.
طبعا وقتی که ما فیلم ها را بازی میکردیم مواجه میشدیم با دشمنای دولت. ما هنرمند بدون ملکه زنده ما میماندن. حالا شاید دروغ بگم.
و گفته نمیتونستی که مثلا یک وزیر ارمنی مویش گرد است و اگر امیگا پامیل زیدی داستان سنتاب نشیدی 5 روز بود میک میشن.
ما البته در فیلم‌های خود تا به حال هم وجدان بسیار زیاد آرام دارم. آنچه واقعیت بده یا این واقعیت شیرین بده یا این واقعیت تلخ بده. هر چی که بده ما فقط او را تصویر ساخته می‌کنم. ما با دراماتورگی فیلم خود پورا یک جا کردیم.
So, you can go to the next slide. Yes, there we go. Perfect. So this premiered at the 2019 Berlinale and was released theatrically in the US in 2021. Very weird COVID era release. And it's currently on iTunes and all the things. What is it? Apple TV now? Whatever. And distributed. Actually, it just got re-released on Blu-ray in the spring by Vinegar Syndrome. So I guess it's officially a cult film now, which is a fun thing. I was like, people still make Blu-rays. I didn't know that. Apparently they make limited edition Blu-rays, only 1,000 copies. Yeah, very pretty, lots of extras. I had to make all the extras. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. Okay, next slide. So the film came out of my long-term engagement with the Afghan Films Archive, the National Film Archive of Afghanistan. And so the research, production, and post spanned about 7 years, and included some pretty unusual features like running digitization workshops in the archive. And if you're curious about that, we can talk about it more in the Q&A. Also, obviously, the film has like some different resonances now than it did when I made it. Its conditions have changed. Also, a number of the people who are in the film are now either dead or in exile. So it's like a whole thing for me to watch it now, even it's like very different. Okay, next slide. So as that film was launching, I'd actually already started my second feature, Dis-ease, which I completed in June of 2024. So again, it took me about 7 years from research to finishing. I guess that's how long it takes me to finish a feature film. Dis-ease is about how we imagine disease and how that affects what we do when we encounter it in real life. So when we encounter doctors, treatments, outbreaks, sick people, and disability, it dives really deep into the weird, wild archives of science and medicine to understand how ideas about disease have moved between science fiction, and ideology over the past century, basically since germ theory first emerged in the late 19th century. So we can look at that trailer now.
This is the story of the constant invader.
We've all watched the films about a pandemic apocalypse, sometimes involving zombies and sometimes not.
Disease both activates our sense of deep fear and emergency, and also tells us, well, if we all get in line and do the following things, it'll all be okay and we'll be able to manage it.
Contagion is used to configure community, who belongs, who's a threat.
When we talk about infectious diseases as a problem of invasion, we only look at the presence or absence of the germ.
A microscope lets you see certain things in much more detail, but at the same time obscures a bigger picture. The outbreak narrative, similarly, since it shows us how to think about a problem, it also obscures other possibilities.
Much easier to tell people to keep themselves safe by individual behaviors and deflect attention from the structural conditions.
We can't come up with drugs and vaccines fast enough to prevent all of the death and disruption that happens when you have that first wave of a new disease. We need to think more deeply about how human health is connected to animal health and ecosystem health so that we can have lasting solutions.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so the film is based on 6 years of archival research and interviews with 26 scholars, journalists, scientists, activists, and doctors. And it draws from global health history spanning the late 19th century to the present. And ultimately, it's intended as a provocation to rethink how we define both the public and health in public health. So again, just a really small project, just a really, really small, not very ambitious project, but just trying to think about who is included in the public of public health, what counts as care, and what it means to be sick or well, or whether that binary is even useful anymore in a world that is perpetually on the brink of collapse. This is going into educational distribution and streaming early next year. That'll be the same educational distributor as my last film, Good Docs. Okay, next slide. Yes, here we go. So while I was working on disease, I made several other projects, including a related but more experimental film commissioned by Field of Vision. Next slide. Which is called The Fire This Time, and looks at the 3 specific historical intersections of pandemics and riots. Next slide. And then I also made this permanent public project, The Worlds We Speak, which was commissioned by Delta Airlines for the new Terminal C at LaGuardia Airport. And it's installed in the baggage claim area in Terminal C. Hilariously, I never check luggage, so I never see it. Next slide. The Worlds We Speak is a visualization of linguistic diversity based on data from the Endangered Language Alliance's NYC language map. So it spotlights the more than 700 languages and dialects that are spoken in the regions served by LaGuardia Airport, so the tri-state metro area. And every sphere represents one region. So each of these big kind of clusters represents one region within the tri-state metro area. Every circle is one linguistic community within that region. The circle sizes correspond to the size of the linguistic community. And the colors are the language families and regions of origin. Then next slide, please. Every circle is stamped with the endonym of the language spoken by that community. So the endonym is the name of the language in its own language and its own script. So we actually designed our own font for this project because there's no existing font where all languages have the same letter height. So we started with Google Noto and then went from there. The Endangered Language Alliance also conducted some new research for us for this project to create what we call the flight paths, which are these lines coming out of the thing to the those things like Goce, Slovenia outside the clusters. And those represent longstanding links between small linguistic communities in New York and the small towns from which they originated. Yeah. Next slide, please. So friends who pass through the airport have been sending me snapshots of their own languages as they find them on the wall, which is so delightful. I love it so much. Do this if you find your own. And there's also an interactive online version of it, which is accessible via QR code at the airport or online at worldswespeak.com, but it is designed to be mobile first. So it's not that great if you look at it on a desktop. Next slide. This was a crazy project, honestly. It was a giant puzzle to put together. Also a fiendish copy editing challenge. And I worked with many, many, many amazing collaborators to do this, including people from Endangered Language Alliance, a project manager, an architect, graphic designers, and a ceramicist who kept telling me, tiles are not meant to be circles, Mariam. Why did you make them circles? What were you thinking? Yes. Okay, next slide. So most recently, I made this body of work around grief, black holes and objects that have lost their use value, which is where the video in this show came from. So this started out as a solo show at Ryan Lee Gallery in New York, and the centerpiece of it was There's a Hole in the World Where You Used to Be, the short film on view here, which is about memory, mourning, exile, black holes, and war at a distance. And it really departs from the premise that both grief and black holes are so dense and so intense that they warp space and time around their specific gravity. Okay, next slide. In the Ryan Lee show, the film was installed with sculptures that were made from my old clothes that also incorporated LED lights. The show is all about reuse, recycling things that have been discarded. Next slide, please. And this was the mood board in my studio at the time for reference. This is what I was looking at. Okay. The show also included both collages and sculptures. Next slide, please. That were made from deprecated currency. So that is currency that has either been demonetized, which is officially withdrawn from circulation, or has fallen out of use because its value has plummeted due to inflation. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so one of the things I made out of them were hamsas, which are symbols of protection against the evil eye, giving a new value to something that's lost its value. There's a Lebanese pound coin in there that's worth a fraction of a cent right now because of inflation. Next slide, please. So as the title suggests, the show as a whole was about how the seemingly permanent becomes ephemeral. And it asked what counts, who does the accounting, what stories we tell through the things we value, and which images of the past remain available to the present. We're circling all the way back to what I said at the beginning. Next slide, please. So I'm now actually in the research stage for a new project about my great uncle Raymond Ghosn, who was an influential Lebanese modernist architect and educator. He was shot by a former student who had been expelled due to a pro-Palestinian protest that occupied an entire 200 students occupied a building at the American University of Beirut, and were all expelled en masse, and then blackballed from all Lebanese universities. And one of these students later shot 2 deans at the American University of Beirut, one of whom was my great uncle. This was all during the early years of the Lebanese Civil War, 1976. Okay, next slide, please. So I spent part of this past summer going through Raymond's papers and his archive of photographs. Next slide, please. And also filming at several of his buildings, including the family house in the mountains that he designed and built for my grandmother. Next slide, please. Okay. And I'm also researching a new collaborative project about the half-life of war, which is to say the long-term environmental and health impacts of war, that will likely start in Lebanon as well, but expand to cover multiple territories and timescales. Next slide. That's all we have time for. Please feel free to ask questions also specifically about the video in the show if you would like to dig deeper into anything that I covered. Thank you. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Mhm.
Thank you, Mariam. It's great to see your work again, and some of it I hadn't seen before too. When you were making the film with the parallel museums, explain the women who appeared in them, and yeah. Oh, and everyone, you got to see Dis-ease. It's hilarious on top of everything.
It is actually quite funny, yes. It's not all serious. A lot of it's funny. Okay, yeah. So in a brief history of collapses, there are 2 women. There's one on each side, and the camera is basically constantly pursuing these figures that are constantly escaping the frame, either of the camera or of the architecture. And each of them is dressed in clothes from a specific period that we were trying to reference from the history of the buildings. And they're also dressed in mourning colors for each culture. So white is the mourning color in Afghanistan and black is the mourning color in Germany. So they're kind of like ghosts, but they're also kind of like mourners. The German side, they're wearing clothes from the 30s, which is when fascism was really clamping down in Kassel. It was a library at the time, the building, and that's when they started removing books and burning them. So it was a very hard time in the building then. And then it's closed from the 20s, the late teens, early 20s in Afghanistan, which is the Amanullah period when the building was built and when the kind of like there was this whole modernist project that the building is a symbol of for most Afghans. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Hi there. I love your artwork. It's so beautiful. In the film Across the Hall, there's one scene that there's a market and it starts swirling. And I was so curious about the spot where the swirl ends and it's still clear. And what made you pick that spot?
Trying to think like a market. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I think that part is that's Afghanistan. That's Kabul. It's like an aerial view of Kabul, and it's basically that's the thing that's swirling is actually from a NASA animation of a black hole. I used a lot of NASA footage in that thing. It's public domain. And it is essentially like circling in on the very center of the city. Yeah, because that market is held in the exact center of Kabul. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mariam, I was curious, going again back to the film and the show, because some of these projects you talked about, are 7 years or longer endeavors. And I was hopefully you could share a little bit about the film on view here and kind of like what was the impetus for the idea and how long you worked on it.
Yeah, so this film really came about because I finished Dis-ease, and then there was this long period where I was just waiting for, like, I finished my part and there was this long period where I was waiting for color and sound to be done. And the film has archival from, I think, 90 different sources. So color and sound took a really, really long time. Color especially like took forever, because it was also a lot of archival restoration. And I had this big chunk of empty time, and suddenly I was like, wow, I have a lot of feelings that I haven't had time to feel, because I've been trying to finish a feature. And that's all I was allowing myself to do. But in the meantime, this whole collapse happened in Afghanistan. Things have been going crazy in Lebanon. I hadn't seen my family in Lebanon since before the pandemic. Everything, yeah, there was just many, many things that had happened that I had not really processed because I had been working so hard, and had been so stressed out about finishing the film. And so as soon as I had a chunk of empty time, I just was like, oh, now I have to grieve. And because I'm me, I was like, oh, now I have to make a piece about grief. But it was an idea I had about grief and black holes that had been in the back of my head for a really long time. I'd actually proposed something around it to the Monument Lab in Philadelphia like years ago for the first Monument Lab. And it didn't happen for various reasons. And so it just came back to me and I was like, let me revisit this idea. And also, after working on Dis-ease, which is a film that required many, many, many people to finish, I wanted to make something that I could make almost entirely by myself. So I did almost all the work on the film. I did all the animation, I did all the editing, I did all the shooting, I did, all of it. And then I got a sound designer in at the very end to polish it up. Yeah. And it felt really good to like go back to that small scale of working where everything was under my own control. And I wasn't dependent on all these other people to make the thing work. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your work and your generous talk. I was here on a field trip with some students. Sounds so weird. But I wanted to ask one of the questions that some of the students had, which was like about the film and the show. And they were curious about, I'm going to use the term chapters, I guess, for lack of a better term, but they were curious about the kind of text that you use to differentiate the different chapters and kind of what those different vignettes or chapters, what they kind of meant to you. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, you could think about them as 5 stages of grief, I guess. 5 chapters, 5 stages of grief. I wasn't totally thinking about it that way when I first made it, because originally there were only 4 chapters. And then I made chapter 2 I made later. That was the last one I made. Yeah. But then it needed to be the second one, right? So I think I always thought it would be divided into sections, because I think each of the sections is coming at the idea and feeling of grief in a really different way. And also the kind of after effects work I did really separately from the work that I did in Premiere. And when I started putting them together, I was like, no, these actually are fairly separate in the way that they feel and operate. So I think putting a divider between them makes more sense. The whole piece was coming from a fairly poetic place. And so giving the sections these poetic titles that evoked, you know, images of dead stars and things like that. Yeah, it was felt right. Yeah. And the titles just came immediately. I tend to do that with titles. Yeah. I tend to never have trouble with chapter titles, and occasionally I have trouble with titles for like the entire work. But like Disease also has 10 chapters, and I love all the chapter titles, and I still don't like the title of the actual film. So yeah. 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 Okay. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Mariam. I mean, it's just really impressive to learn so much about. I mean, when do you sleep? I'm not quite sure. You don't sleep. Well, I just have a few thank yous before we say goodnight. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to our wonderful Jackie O'Brien, who's been running the Zoom and the PowerPoint, and to Elle from our events team and our wonderful marketing team for getting the word out to our community. Shows such as Do We Say Goodbye really wouldn't be possible without wonderful collaborators such as Middlebury College, who and Dr. Sarah Rogers, who had to leave just a little early, but is a wonderful collaborator and introduced me to Mariam's work. We also couldn't do it without the support of the Maslow Family Foundation, the Bill Gottsman and Deborah Lopez Gottsman family, and Ernie Parmelo. And special thanks to our programmatic partners, the Vermont Association of Psychoanalytic Studies, VAPS, and Burlington City Arts is supported in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as the Vermont Arts Council. Thank you, everyone. If you have a moment, could you take time to fill out our evaluations? This is a way that we can, you got to get that data. This is a way that we can continue to bring such great programs and exhibitions here to our community, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.